This is a story of power, steeped in traditions, poverty, wealth, ambition, and violence. Sometimes that violence is called military conflict. Sometimes it is called insurrection, sometimes murder. A network of connivance links underworld gangsters and international intelligence agencies, industrial groups, military circles, and politicians. Black labor also yields a great deal of money. Once, slaves worked for no payment at all, but even today, labor in some areas costs very little. Traditional northern factory towns now only receive and ship goods manufactured in mills, transplanted to the south, where the labor is still the cheapest. And the workers must not become too excited. It is in this world of murky competition for power, energy, and resources that John and Robert Kennedy come to the forefront of the American political scene.
You, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
That you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
And will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
John Kennedy says he will change American society. A death trap closes in on him when he has been president a mere 1,000 days. Robert Kennedy, too, wants to follow his brother's path, but another trap is waiting for him. It remains for the third and last brother, Ted, the youngest of them, to speak for him.
I want to express what we feel to those who mourn with us today in this cathedral and around the world. What he leaves to us is what he said, what he did, and what he stood for. There is discrimination in this world, and slavery and slaughter and starvation. Governments repress their people. Millions are trapped in poverty, while the nation grows rich, and wealth is lavished on armaments everywhere. These are differing evils, but they are the common works of man. They reflect the imperfection of human justice, the inadequacy of human compassion, our lack of sensibility towards the suffering of our fellows.
After Robert Kennedy's death, the Republican and Democratic conventions in Miami and Chicago nominated their candidates for the presidency of the United States. In Chicago, a center of organized crime, Vice President Hubert Humphrey is backed by President Johnson and by the unions, who included among their bosses some notorious gangsters who had been Robert's enemies. Humphrey's turncoat attitude prompts Norman Mailer to compare him to an innocent virgin when he speaks about peace in Vietnam. We ought to open the minds of these youngsters who prefer making love and not war, says Chicago's Mayor Daley. Miami Beach. Amid multicolored balloons and blacks slain by the police, the Republican candidate to be the 37th President of the United States is selected. It is a choice that concerns the entire world. The White House is the pivot of world power. From here depend the American nuclear strike and the welfare of entire continents, the construction or the destruction of the world of tomorrow. And here lives are in danger. Death comes as it did to John Kennedy, President of the United States. Death comes to Robert Kennedy, a favored candidate to become president. Irish Catholics, such as the Kennedys, land in Boston and are barred from good society. But the Kennedy grandfathers succeed in breaking through the caste barriers. The maternal grandfather, John Fitzgerald, known as Honey Fitz, was mayor of Boston for many years. The paternal grandfather, Patrick J. Kennedy, was a classic tough guy working on the docks as a boy, then making his money in whiskey, becoming a state representative at 28 and a state senator at 32. His son, Joe, studied at Harvard University. Then Joe married Rose Fitzgerald, daughter of Mayor Honey Fitz, uniting the prestige and the fortunes of the two families. When the Great Depression rocks the USA in 1929, Joe Kennedy engages in many kinds of opportunistic speculations. He becomes rich and decides that one of his sons is going to get to the White House. Joe Kennedy Jr., the eldest, here playing football with his brother John. Joe Sr. gives his financial backing to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidential campaign. Roosevelt writes to little Robert Kennedy, "Dear Bob, your dad has told me that you're a stamp collector. When you come through Washington, call and see my collection." These are the years of Prohibition. Al Capone reigns over Chicago and the underworld of bootlegging. The Sicilian Mafia, with its millions of dollars in votes, holds sway throughout the United States, bribing members of the police and some public authorities in the big cities, as well as certain leaders in the major political parties. But despite his friends high up, Al Capone ends up in jail on a tax evasion charge. In the East, Joe Kennedy gets wind of the coming end of Prohibition and succeeds in securing exclusive import licenses for Scotch whiskey and other liquor from England. Roosevelt appoints him ambassador to Great Britain. In England, young John Kennedy studies economics under Harold Lasky, a socialist. But Joe Sr. remains a conservative and does not consider Hitler's rise to power as a negative historical event. The Nazis invade Austria. To preserve world peace, the Munich Pact is signed at Hitler's chalet, and Czechoslovakia is bartered for a piece of paper. Even England is now threatened. Hitler does not stop. This is war. Churchill becomes Prime Minister, and Ambassador Joe Kennedy, who had considered Hitler as a lesser evil in Europe, hands in his resignation. President Roosevelt recalls him to the United States.
I'm returning to Washington to report to the President. I leave England at this time with real regret. No one could do otherwise. There will not be 1 minute while I am away that I shall not be thinking of you and praying for you.
Joe Kennedy is also thinking of amassing millions through real estate deals in New York and by oil prospecting. Oil has a great strategic importance in wartime. The power of the armed forces and the armaments industries reaches dizzy heights when the United States government allocates billions of dollars to win the war, which is spreading all over the world. The Allied reaction is unleashed over Germany. Joe Kennedy's sons go off to war too. The V-1s and the V-2s built for Hitler by von Braun batter away at the cities of England. Joe Kennedy Jr., whom his father was hoping to make President of the United States, leaves on a bombing raid of a V-2 launching site in Germany. The eldest of the Kennedy sons never returns to his base. In the Pacific, meanwhile, a grim battle is being fought, and this will be decisive for the outcome of the Second World War. Future President John Kennedy commands torpedo boat PT-109, which is sunk by the Japanese. In the water, he reportedly saves 3 of his crew, one of them seriously wounded. Robert Kennedy, too, although not yet 18 years old, decides to volunteer for the Navy. But by now, the war is nearly over. The Russians and the Americans meet at the Elbe. Peace brings back hope and joy. The atom bomb marks the beginning of a new race between East and West for strategic predominance. As the world is split into 2 blocks, the young do not want to hear more talk of war. Like all returning war veterans, John and Robert Kennedy would like to spend time with pretty girls. But their implacable father urges them on towards politics and the conquest of power. In 1947, John Fitzgerald Kennedy is elected to Congress. The support given by Joe Kennedy helps put Joseph McCarthy, a friend and wartime comrade of John Kennedy, into the Senate. McCarthy chairs the Committee of Un-American Activities, is a frequent visitor at the Kennedy House, has some dates with Patricia Kennedy, and takes on Robert Kennedy to work with him. The committee extends its investigations to Hollywood.
If I were even suspicious of a person with whom I were scheduled to work being a communist, I'm afraid that it'd have to be them or me.
Like others in the motion picture industry, I have maintained a relentless vigilance against un-American influences.
I believe I would move to the state of Texas if it ever came here, because I think the Texans would kill them on sight. I gave up my job to fight against the totalitarianism which was called fascism. I am quite willing to give it up again to fight against a totalitarianism called communism.
Nixon, too, sits on that dreaded committee.
Mr. Cooper, will you state your full name and present address, please?
My name is Gary Cooper. Live in Los Angeles, California.
Increase or on the decrease out in Hollywood?
It's very difficult to say right now within these last few months because it has become unpopular and a little risky to say too much. And you notice the difference. People who were quite easy to express their thoughts before begin to clam up more than they used to.
In other words, some of them are getting religion.
Well, I don't know, but they do their discussions in corners, I guess, in huddles of their own where they...
Today, and we hope that we didn't put you out too much.
Not at all, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Cooper, if you just stay over there, or if you want to leave, well, it's up to you.
Young Congressman John Fitzgerald Kennedy meets Jacqueline Lee Bouvier, a girl of good family and an amateur journalist, when she comes to interview him. A match is made. At the wedding, Robert is at his brother's side. It is he who later organizes John Kennedy's victorious campaign for election to the Senate. John is a level-headed, detached man with a playful sense of humor. Bobby, on the other hand, is rather shy and stubborn. Robert Kennedy joins the faction opposing the McCarthy Committee and has a head-on clash during the committee's hearings with Roy Cohn, McCarthy's right-hand man. Cohn is going so far as to make accusations against the Secretary of the Army and a number of generals.
What I'm trying to find out from the Secretary is if, on any occasion prior to November 6th, he, the Secretary, or any authorized representative of his, directly asked Senator McCarthy to stop hearings on Monmouth and communist infiltration in the Army.
The Pentagon rebels against McCarthy's folly and launches a counterattack. A Senate commission, one of whose members is Robert Kennedy, lays charges against the witch hunter. Among other things, a cut and biased photo of the Secretary of the Army has been displayed. Robert Kennedy is one of the prime movers of the vote of censure against McCarthy and Roy Cohn. McCarthy has to go, a broken man. Due to a bad spinal injury, John Kennedy has the opportunity not to take part in the Senate vote against a friend who had given his family so much and received so much in return. When Joseph McCarthy leaves the scene, it is the end of an era. America wants a new policy based on broader views. At the Democratic Convention in 1956, young Senator Kennedy begins to make his mark.
Ladies and gentlemen of this convention, it is now my privilege to present to this convention the next Democratic nominee and our next President of the United States, Admiral E. Stevenson.
John would like to run for the vice presidency with Stevenson, but the delegates have not forgotten his links with McCarthy.
John Kennedy of Massachusetts.
Robert Kennedy accuses Hoffa of a series of crimes. His brother proposes a bill against the influence of gangsters in the unions.
For the fact that this is a strike-breaking, union-busting bill, in my opinion.
Mr. Harper, this bill is not a strike-breaking, union-busting bill. You're the best argument I know for it. Your testimony here this afternoon, your complete indifference to the fact that numerous people who hold responsible positions in your union come before this committee and take the Fifth Amendment because an honest answer might tend to incriminate them. Your complete indifference to it, I think, makes this bill
In response to Kennedy's attack, 100,000 Teamsters threatened to paralyze America with an unprecedented strike.
That is hard to what took place in Washington. And I say to you, there was time that was exposed to the American workers, to the Teamsters who have been the brunt of the entire problem, by saying to you that a hypocritical senator who has never given an individual the right to vote in his own state, who is right this very hour.
While leaving the hearings, after these people had testified regarding this matter, did you say that SOB, I'll break his back?
Who?
You.
Say to who?
To anyone. Did you make that statement after these people testified before the committee?
I never talked to either one of them after testifying.
No, I'm not talking about to them. Did you make that statement here in the hearing room after the testimony was finished?
Not concerning them, far as I know of.
Well, who did you make it about?
I don't know. I may have been discussing somebody in a figure of speech.
Well, who did you make the statement? Whose back
I
were you
don't
going to
even
break?
remember it.
Well, whose back were you going to break, Mr. Hoffa?
Figure of speech, I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know.
Whether physically or figuratively.
What, sir?
Did you make that remark about any member of this committee, any member of its staff, or any witness who may have testified before it or whose testimony is expected?
I do not recall making any such a statement. I certainly do not make it about any member of this committee or any staff member or any witness that I can recall. I know I did not. I'm sure that I don't know about it. Recall back to Monday.
Hoffa declares war on the Kennedys. But they are not intimidated and attack other menacing trade union gangsters like Johnny Dio Giovanni Dioguardi, charged with blinding journalist Victor Rysel, who had looked too deep into his affairs. Frank Costello, identified by the Kefauver inquiry as king of the underworld, was even reported to have influenced elections in the Democratic Party and in Tammany Hall. Former New York Mayor Dwyer states that, for all practical purposes, the law is so made that it prevents the opening of criminal proceedings against the mafia bosses. Lucky Luciano, another gangster said to have collaborated during the war with the American Secret Service, are rewarded for their patriotism by being released from jail and deported to Italy. Luciano frequently travels from Sicily to Cuba to meet a number of narcotic kings. In the 1950s, Cuba is the capital of world gangsterism. The arrival of Fidel Castro in 1959 forces a large number of gangsters to emigrate. The center of the dope trade and of the underworld moves elsewhere, while the Italian-American mafia is shaken from top to bottom by a battle for the leadership. Albert Anastasia is killed in broad daylight in New York in the barber's chair of the Hotel Park Sheraton. Frank Costello, too, is shot and wounded in the head by a hired killer's bullet. According to Joe Valacci, the person behind these shootings is Vito Genovesi, who has decided to take over control of the mafia all over the world. In Hollywood, the so-called Sinatra clan comes in close contact with the Kennedys when Sinatra's close associate, Peter Lawford, marries Patricia Kennedy. In 1960, when John Kennedy decides to run in the presidential elections, through Sinatra and his clan, he eventually obtains the votes of the Italian-American communities. Kennedy is up against candidates like Vice President Nixon and Democrat Hubert Humphrey. In such company, many considered Kennedy's wealth and Catholic background to put him at a disadvantage with the popular electorate. The CIA, the United States powerful intelligence organization, sends a U-2 plane on a top-secret mission over Russia. The plane is shut down. The news reaches Khrushchev in Paris during his negotiations with President Eisenhower. Khrushchev loses his temper and says he will refuse to have any more dealings with Ike. He says he will await the election of the next president of the United States, and he adds that it had better not be Nixon. So Kennedy has an ally in Moscow. But he has to be on his guard at the Democratic Party convention in Los Angeles. Lyndon Johnson arrives from Texas with 400 votes of the southern states. Johnson knows how to run an electoral campaign and right away attacks young Kennedy. In their first clash, Johnson claims that Kennedy has almost always been absent from the Senate, while he himself always attended sessions. Kennedy answers that this proves that Johnson is the right man for the Senate, but not to be President of the United States.
Senator Johnson, full of affection for him, strongly in support of him for majority leader, and I'm confident that in that position, we're all going to be able to work together. Thank you.
In the meantime, Robert Kennedy, the ace up John's sleeve, works on the floor, putting into effect a plan aimed at getting his brother the majority of the delegates' votes. But Johnson counterattacks. He says Kennedy is young and inexperienced, and accuses him for his former attitude toward McCarthyism. He also lashes out at Kennedy's father, accusing him of making money out of all sorts of deals and criticizing him for his pre-war attitude to Hitler. This is a blow below the belt for John Kennedy. But the charges are essentially against his father. In the end, the convention makes him their candidate.
To a fruitful America, to a peaceful world for mankind everywhere, is the great senator from the state of Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy.
The victory vote comes from Wyoming.
Wyoming's vote will make a majority for Senator Kennedy. I can assure all of you here who have reposed this confidence in me that I will be worthy of your trust. We will carry the fight to the people in the fall, and we shall win.
But the Southern Democrats are against Kennedy and behind Lyndon Johnson. Kennedy disappoints many of his friends and supporters by following his father's advice and accepting his former political enemy Johnson as his running mate. Rumors are spreading. Will John Kennedy divorce Jacqueline? This boat trip at Hyannisport serves to reassure the press and to give the Democratic candidate some rest before his final bout of electioneering. In his TV debates with Nixon and on his election tours, John promises a more effective policy toward Berlin and Cuba, promises he will have cause to remember when he is elected president. Finally, John Kennedy returns to Boston for his closing speech of the campaign.
War and peace, the progress of this country, the security of our people, the education of our children, jobs for men and women who want to work, the development of our resources, the symbolic feeling of a nation, the image the nation presents to the world, its power, prestige, and direction, all ultimately will come to rest upon upon the next President of the United States.
Election Day. The Americans supporting Kennedy retained the majority. He has the votes of the blacks, the immigrants, with or without the mafia, the lower classes, to whom he has promised a more just America. He is backed by the big unions and by some of the oil and steel barons. Remember that his father, Joe Kennedy, is one of them, an oil magnate, a multimillionaire, one of the richest men in America. At 5:45 a.m. on November 9, 1960, the 20 electoral votes from Michigan clinched John Kennedy's election as President of the United States. For the first time since the start of the election campaign, his father Joe appears at his son's side. After having had a large part in the financing and organizing of the campaign, but keeping out of the public eye so that as not to jeopardize John's chances. Symbolic floats representing the 50 states of the Union parade by in front of the youngest president in United States history. His own state of Massachusetts is represented by torpedo boat PT-109, which he commanded during the war in the Pacific. In Johnson's honor, Texas has sent a cowboy riding a snorting buffalo. Kennedy says, "We are today at the limit of a new frontier, a frontier of challenges and of unknown dangers, of hope and of threats." Robert Kennedy is appointed Attorney General.
There are a number of different areas where action is needed. I think that in the field of organized crime, I think it's a very serious situation that's facing the country at the present time. I think a lot of steps can be taken in order to deal with the problem. I think it's gotten much more serious over the period of the last 10 years.
Robert Kennedy's department is also in charge of the FBI, which is headed by J. Edgar Hoover. But Hoover is none too enthusiastic about working with this inexperienced young Attorney General. The president has barely set foot in the White House when he finds himself facing some grave problems. His first headache is Cuba. A group of Cuban volunteers trained by the CIA is ready to land on the island. The Secret Service and the Pentagon are certain the Cuban population will rise against Castro. But in mid-April, when the anti-Castro commandos leave the United States and some neighboring Latin American countries and land in the Bay of Pigs, the Cubans do not rise against Castro. Instead, the armed population helps the Cuban dictator push the commandos back into the sea as soon as they land. The commandos radio the CIA for the promised help from the American Air Force. Kennedy refuses. The intervention of the United States Air Force would be an overt act of aggression and could even lead to a third world war. This spells the failure of the Cuban volunteers. Hundreds of them are taken prisoner by Castro's men. The Cuban exiles in the United States attack Kennedy as traidor, a traitor. The trials begin in Cuba. The raiders risk being sentenced to death for high treason, as Batista's men have been 2 years before. The president assigns his brother, the Attorney General, to investigate CIA operations in Cuba and elsewhere. The old chief of the CIA, Allen Dulles, has to hand in his resignation. The new chief of the agency, who is sworn in by Supreme Court Justice Warren in Kennedy's presence, is John McCone, an oilman. The appointment of an oil man to head the CIA can be explained by the fact that with the world divided into two blocks, the secret services are most active in countries with rich mineral resources, and oil deposits. In Iran, for example, the CIA has beaten the Russian Secret Service and has made sure the country is under their control. Whoever owns the oil dominates the world and stands the best chance of winning a war. In the struggle for power, oil is a dangerous issue. Enrico Mattei, who gave the big trust plenty to worry about because he managed to bring Italy into the big-time international oil game, is killed in a mysterious air crash. The Pentagon is one of the main customers of the Texas oil companies, which are foremost in fixing the price of oil throughout the world. Uranium is another source of energy disputed by East and West. The strategic balance of the world is based largely on the atomic balance of power. Shortly after achieving independence, the Congo pays a heavy toll in human lives for the privilege of possessing the world's richest uranium mines. Prime Minister Lumumba is captured before the eyes of United Nations troops by his Katangese enemies, and after being horribly tortured, is killed in a bath of sulfuric acid. Lumumba had wanted to take his country into the Russian sphere of influence, but America cannot do without the Congo's uranium, just as Russia cannot do without Czechoslovakia's uranium. Oil interests also play a foremost role in shaping United States policy in Latin America. John Kennedy promotes the Alliance for Progress, aimed at helping Latin America to attain economic independence. On his visit to Puerto Rico, Caracas, and Bogota, the young president is acclaimed as a liberator.
And gentlemen, Mr. President, one of the Kennedys does not need an interpreter, so I'd like to have my wife say just a word to you.
Debería estar al alcance de todos y no limitarse a unos pocos afortunados.
In Huntsville, Alabama, where the German von Braun is building missiles for the conquest of space, and throughout the South, where many important armaments factories are located, racist interests have their thoughts on wars, both big and small. The Southerners are irritated by Kennedy's pacifism. Here, the Ku Klux Klan still holds sway. And alongside the factories producing rockets for the moon and Mars, the underpaid labor of the blacks remains one of the sources of the wealth of the South, and no less a dangerous issue than oil. The racial policy of the Kennedys and John's attempt to reach an agreement with the Russians fall hardly short of treason in the eyes of the conservatives. When the president goes to Europe, his journey is regarded with his utmost suspicion. Kennedy appears cold, timid, and almost embarrassed during his meeting with Khrushchev in Vienna. But the Pentagon, which has had such a great say in shaping United States world strategy since the war, is placed under a politician with an iron fist, Defense Secretary McNamara, president of the Ford Motor Company before filling this key post.
Too long we have fixed our eyes on traditional military needs, on armies prepared to cross borders, on missiles poised for flight. Now it should be clear that this is no longer enough, that our security may be lost piece by piece, country by country, without the firing of a single missile or the crossing of a single border. We intend to profit from this lesson. We intend to re-examine and reorient our forces of all kinds, our tactics, and our institutions here in this community. We intend to intensify our efforts for a struggle in many ways more difficult than war, where disappointment will often accompany it.
The prospects outlined by Kennedy certainly do not arouse the enthusiasm of those who advocate a tough policy and total war. A number of generals and admirals make public protest. The radar network and the American bases throughout the world are cut back, giving rise to other grumbling and protest, which can readily be appreciated when one remembers that 50% of the American budget goes directly or indirectly on expenditures linked with the armed forces. Kennedy is deeply preoccupied with the arms race, and to the disappointment of many generals and admirals, he reiterates that the aim of defense spending should be to maintain peace and not to wage war.
Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.
Just as Gromyko is visiting the White House to negotiate the ending of nuclear tests, a new danger threatens the world. Photographs taken by the CIA's U-2 plane show that long-range Soviet missiles are being installed in Cuba, threatening the whole territory of the United States. At the White House, there is a round of feverish meetings. Stevenson proposes offering Russia the withdrawal of American Jupiter missiles from Turkey and Italy in exchange for the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba. The general's reaction to this proposal is violent. Air Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay urges on the president the need to level Cuba to the ground by a massive air strike. Kennedy, supported by McNamara, fears the consequences of any such irreparable action and orders the U.S. fleet to blockade the island and to intercept any vessels carrying missiles.
Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace. Let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission.
A convoy of Russian ships laden with missiles is heading for the island at full speed. The danger of a third world war seems imminent. The Russian vessels steam closer and closer to the American blockade. All Kennedy's attempts to establish direct contact with Khrushchev are in vain. On Cuba, the American base at Guantanamo is directly threatened by Castro's guns. by the supreme decision, the president is alone with himself. The decision between world peace or war is in his hands alone. Finally, Khrushchev offers Kennedy the withdrawal of the missiles in exchange for a binding pledge that the United States will organize no further attack on the island of Cuba. Kennedy accepts. The Russian ships turn course and sail away. The tension is over, and the world can breathe once again. Castro agrees to hand over the volunteers captured in the Bay of Pigs Landing, but in return he asks for medical supplies and food worth $53 million. The anti-Castro volunteers return home on Christmas Eve 1962. Many Cubans still blame Kennedy for betraying them by refusing the air support promised them by the CIA. Robert Kennedy, who as Attorney General also oversees the CIA, welcomes the volunteers back. On December 29, 1962 in Miami, the Volunteer Brigade presents to President Kennedy the battle flag that had flown for a few hours in the Bay of Pigs. Perhaps to be forgiven for failing to send in the Air Force, Kennedy makes a reckless promise, which he will not keep.
Great appreciation to the brigade for making the United States the custodian of this flag. I can assure you that this flag will be returned to this brigade in a free Havana.
Es un honor para mí el estar hoy entre un grupo de los hombres más valientes del mundo.
While the president is busy with politics, his wife is busily engaged in world traveling and with social engagements. Among those close to the Kennedys are the brothers Oleg and Igor Cassini, the one a well-known journalist and the other a famous dress designer who also dresses Jacqueline. Ramfis Trujillo, son of the dictator of Santo Domingo, is charged by Congress in Washington with spending the dollars allocated to his country as American aid on presents for Kim Novak and other Hollywood stars. Porfirio Rubirosa, one of Trujillo's diplomats, marries multimillionaires Barbara Hutton. Trujillo himself and President Salazar of Portugal act as witnesses. Personalities from Santo Domingo, like Trujillo and Rubirosa, could be useful to the United States as sources of information and high-up political pawns in the delicate area of the Caribbean, a mere stone's throw from Cuba. The same can be said about ship owner Onassis in Greece. When Jacqueline loses her third child, she takes a vacation in the Mediterranean, first in Italy and then as Aristotle Onassis' guest aboard the yacht Christina. Jacqueline leaves the Christina on September 30, 1963, 52 days before the tragedy in Dallas. John Kennedy, too, likes to relax by indulging in pleasurable social get-togethers with an international flavor. At the president's birthday party, his Hollywood brother-in-law, Peter Lawford, is the one who introduces him to the most attractive of all American actresses.
President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
The papers also report a flirtation between John, or Robert Kennedy, and the blonde star, who is at this period considered the living symbol of Hollywood style of femininity.
Now, it is with great pleasure that I present this photoplay plaque to you, Miss Marilyn Monroe, in recognition of your sensational rise to stardom in 1952. On behalf of Photoplay magazine, my congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. It's a great thrill, and I'm very appreciative to everyone who's made this possible.
Marilyn, on behalf of Look magazine, I'd like to present to you the Look Achievement Award as the most outstanding feminine newcomer of 1952. Congratulations.
Thank you, Lawrence. And my thanks to Look magazine.
When Marilyn Monroe allegedly took her life with an overdose of sleeping pills and was found dead with a telephone in her hand, certain newspapers spread rumors about Robert Kennedy, reported to have had several meetings with Marilyn. It was even claimed that Marilyn's last phone call was made to Peter Lawford or to Kennedy. In the summer of 1963, President Kennedy goes to Europe to discuss the problems of peace and NATO. He is cheered in Rome, Naples, and Ireland, but above all, in Berlin.
There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin. Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in, to prevent them from leaving us. Freedom is indivisible. And when one man is enslaved, all are not free.
The shadow of slavery has never been lifted from the states of the Deep South. James Meredith, a black student seeking admission to the University of Mississippi, finds the whole state against him, including Governor Ross Barnett. The President and the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, send in federal agents and National Guardsmen with orders to use arms if necessary. to protect Meredith's rights. To defend their traditional supremacy, racist Southerners murdered some black leaders, such as Medgar Evers, in acts of defiant reprisal. Another blow struck by Kennedy against the supremacists is his imposition of the Fair Housing Law. From now on, blacks must be allowed free access to every part of the cities and towns, no longer confined to the traditional ghettos. The governor of Mississippi, Ross Barnett, an uncompromising racist, makes a fiery protest in the Senate.
In direct violation of the United States Constitution, you have been forced to consider this legislation through the pressure and blackmail of mobs in the streets. The President of the United States and the Attorney General have encouraged demonstrations, freedom rides, sit-ins, picketing, and actual violations of local laws.
Kennedy's answer is to receive at the White House Martin Luther King, together with other representatives of 1 million blacks who have come to Washington to demand justice.
Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. But I have a dream. My poor little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
Two months before his death, the president makes a tour of the United States. He says, "A century of delays has passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, and yet their great-grandchildren are still not completely free. They have not yet been freed from the chains of injustice. They have not yet been freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, despite all its hopes and pride, will never be entirely free until all its citizens are free." Joe Valachi, a longtime gangster and killer, denounces the leaders of Cosa Nostra in the American Senate. Cosa Nostra is the worldwide organization of the mafia. Before a commission headed by Senator McClellan, Robert Kennedy acts as public prosecutor and #1 challenger against the most powerful and most feared criminal organization of our time. This is 1 month before the assassination of the president.
It would be fair to say that you went back to prison that you'd be a dead man.
If they got at me, I wouldn't be in there 5 minutes, Senator.
With Valachi's help, Robert Kennedy gathers evidence against the most powerful of the mafia bosses, people like Vito Genovese, who runs a worldwide narcotics racket from prison. In 1938, Genovese had fled to Italy after being charged in New York with a series of homicides. He only returned to America when the witnesses to his crimes had been killed. In this way, he was acquitted. Senator McClellan, chairman of the Senate Committee on Crime, denounces the threat from the mafia.
Cosa Nostra, RSA, the mafia, or whatever the name. Organized crime is today a nefarious government unto itself. Too often it operates beyond the reach and power of the law and of duly constituted governmental authority. The danger of this crime menace is real and immediate. The necessity for combating it effectively is urgent and pressing.
Kennedy's investigation shows that the American underworld makes $25 billion a year on gambling alone. In California, Mickey Cohen controls gambling and horse racing. Robert Kennedy's investigation does not even spare his friend Frank Sinatra. A blonde singer named Phyllis McGuire is picked up in a motel owned by Sinatra, together with Sam Giancana, declared an undesirable by the authorities of Nevada and considered Al Capone's heir in Chicago. Another Cosa Nostra boss is Carlos Marcello.
That have been made between you and the sheriff and any other officials of government to keep unionization out of Jefferson Parish?
I decline to answer on the ground of mere intended information.
Now, according to the information that we have, you are an associate of Mr. Frank Costello, is that right?
I decline to answer on the same ground.
Marcello is an old enemy of Robert Kennedy, who had deported him to Guatemala in 1961 as an undesirable alien. Dallas is within the territory controlled by Marcello's friends, and he also numbers Cuban exiles among his associates.
Have no plans to train Cuban exiles, as a Cuban force in this country or in any other country at this time.
Kennedy has changed his policy, and the training camps for Cuban exiles are closed down and barred. The anti-Castro Cubans see now that the only chance of return to their country is the elimination of the Kennedys. Jack Ruby from Chicago owns a few nightclubs in Dallas and is involved in supplying arms to Cuba. In that area, Carlos Marcello, too, deals in munitions. In Marcello-controlled New Orleans appears Lee Harvey Oswald, an ex-Marine said to have been working with top-secret documents and then to have spent 2 years in the Soviet Union. Oswald had offered to train volunteers against Castro and then reverses himself, organizing a dramatic handout of pamphlets supporting Castro in 1963. Oswald publicly proclaims his sympathy with Castro's Cuba.
No, sir, I am not against, and I think that the red herring and so forth is rather
ridiculous to toss into this conversation.
Then are you a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Oh, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
A few days after the announcement that Kennedy is going to visit Dallas, Lee Oswald moves there and immediately gets a job at the Texas School Book Depository. Some of the oil magnates in Texas are among the richest in the world. John Kennedy proposes the abolition of the law which exempts oilmen from payment of a large part of their taxes. If Kennedy got his way, the oilmen's profits would be cut drastically. And as if this isn't enough, the president also attacks the steel tycoons.
American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives, whose pursuit of private power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility, can show such utter contempt for the interests of 185 million Americans.
Kennedy's enemies now are legion. The final acts of his political life are looked upon by the conservatives as a surrender to the communists. The installation of the hotline between Moscow and Washington to prevent a world war from ensuing through the mistaken assessment of some military situation. The signing of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The sending of American wheat to Russia. And the search for peace in Vietnam and for trade relations with Cuba. According to some adversaries, Kennedy is playing it too much the communist way. They summarize a criticism in a poster. Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. The last minutes of President Kennedy's life. His 1,000 days are about to end. Everything we have seen comes into focus. This is Kennedy's execution. Standing under the Dallas Book Depository, there is a man later believed to be Jack Ruby. After the shooting, we see various people being arrested by the Dallas police on the grassy knoll. Some people claim this man may be James Earl Ray, the future killer of Martin Luther King. it appears that no trace remains in the police files of these people arrested. Surgeon Malcolm Perry, who operated on the president, states that a bullet passed through his throat.
At the time of the tracheostomy, I noted evidence of Aryan blood in his upper medial sternum. Felt that an injury had been sustained in this area by the passage of the bullet through the neck, and asked that a chest tube be put in place, which was done.
According to some witnesses, the first two bullets struck Kennedy first in the throat, then in the back. The third bullet hit the governor, and the fourth and fifth the president's head from two opposing directions. But according to the official version in the Warren report, this one bullet, almost intact, pierced the president from one side to the other. It then went on to wound Connolly in the shoulder, chest, wrist, and knee. But Governor Connolly is sure he was struck by a different bullet.
We heard a shot. I turned to my left. I was sitting in the jump seat. I turned to my left to look in the back seat. The president had slumped. He had said nothing. Almost simultaneously, as I turned, I was hit. And I knew I'd been hit badly.
The governor turned to see what had happened to the president. Had he not, the chances are quite good. The bullet, half of the bullet would have been straight through and through and would have involved the heart. Whereas with his turning to look at the president as he did, this turned into a tangential wound and probably resulted in saving his life. Right. Mrs. Conley says that this is why he turned. They heard the shot, he looked back to see what had happened to the president, and then was struck him.
Besides hitting Kennedy and Governor Connolly, the bullet struck the chromium plating and dented the front of the windshield on the presidential car and a point between the asphalt and the sidewalk. Also, a man about 30 yards away from the presidential car and the sidewalk beneath him, as well as a street sign to the right of the car. In slow motion, the first bullet is clearly seen thrusting the president's head forward and out of shape. Then, immediately after, another bullet from the opposite side, smashing his skull back and scattering fragments backward and to the left. The motorcyclists riding behind the car and to the left are spattered with the president's brain tissues. They instinctively look to the right, toward their probable gunman. Dallas TV's live telecast also pinpoints the place where the shots came from.
The entire building where the sniper was located was evacuated. If we could get a picture of our map here and show somewhere of the building, it was a Texas school book depository, which means exactly what it says.
This is the car where the president was. This is what we call our triple underpass in Dallas. This is the grassy area where, and it was originally thought that the shots came from in here, and now it's believed that the shots came from this building here.
This is how the Dallas TV commentator reports the finding of a gun.
An Australian Mauser.
Later, it is learned that the rifle is a Mannlicher Carcano, a crude weapon. Some reports even claimed 2 guns were found. But let's have another look at the scene in slow motion. The first shot from behind the car deforms the skull forward. A second seems to come from the front and to the right and jerks the president's head backwards, fanning out a burst of blood, while a splinter of bone from the skull flies back over the trunk of the limousine, and Jacqueline Kennedy automatically reaches out as if to catch it. In slow motion, you can see the outline of a sniper leaning on a car roof. In the middle of the top part of the screen, you can make out what could be the smoke from a shot. In another frame, you can see a man's head behind the fence in the exact spot where a number of witnesses saw the smoke and heard the sound of gunshots. The witnesses closest to the president over by the grassy knoll were the Newmans and their 2 children. Newman is at once interviewed on television.
And then if the car got directly in front of us, well, a gunshot apparently from behind us hit the president in the side of the temple.
Do you think the first gunshot came from behind you, too?
I think it came from the same location. Apparently back up on the mall. What you call it.
The 2 nearest witnesses on this side of the street, and seen here at the 2 sides of the screen, are Mary Moorman, who is taking the photo, and her friend Jean Hill, interviewed immediately afterwards.
Shots rang out, and he grabbed his chest, and a look of pain on his face, and fell across toward Jackie, and she fell over on him and said, "My God, he's shot." And there was an interval, and then 3 or 4 more shots rang out. By that time, the motorcade had sped away.
Did you see the person who fired it?
I only heard it, and I looked up and saw a man running up this hill.
Then I heard another shot or 2. I couldn't say it was 1 or 2. And I saw his head practically open up, all blood and everything.
Station Master Holland heard the last 2 shots almost simultaneously, and one came from the grassy knoll where he saw a cloud of smoke rising up under the trees. James Hicks claims to have seen a man on the hill with a gun on the car's baggage rack. The claims opposed to the Warren report are summed up here. 1 bullet from the front, hitting Kennedy in the neck. 1 from behind, hitting Connolly. 2 from behind, getting Kennedy in the back and the head. 1 from the front in Kennedy's head. At Parkland Hospital, Dallas, the president dies a half hour after the shooting. Jacqueline accompanies her husband's body to the airport, where it is loaded aboard the presidential plane. Lyndon Johnson is at once sworn in as the new president of the United States. Then the plane, with a live president and a mirrored one on board, takes off for Washington. Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested in Dallas in a movie theater. Immediately, they identify him as the murderer of President Kennedy and also of a policeman named Tippit.
I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
At the police station, Oswald's wife, Marina, offers a photograph of her husband holding a Mannlicher Carcano rifle supposedly used to shoot at the president and Governor Connolly. The photograph is immediately distributed to all the papers, and many claim it to be a composite fake. Meanwhile, TV stations are comparing a photo of Oswald taken after his arrest with one taken during the shooting, showing a man resembling Oswald standing by the doorway of the book depository. If it were him, he could not have done the shooting. At the Dallas police station, scores of witnesses report, including the cab and bus drivers, who say they drove Oswald home after the shooting. Many of the witnesses will die unexpectedly in the next few months. Oswald is interrogated night and day without any attorney. No record is kept of these sessions, either written or on tape.
Well, I was questioned by a judge. However, I protested at that time that I was not allowed legal representation. But during that very short and sweet hearing, I really don't know what the situation is about. Nobody has told me anything except that I'm accused of murdering a policeman. I know nothing more than that, and I do request someone to come forward to give me a legal assistance.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
You have been.
Nobody said what? Sir?
You have been.
Nobody said what? Okay, we hang here. Help! A policeman hit me.
In Washington, Kennedy's body is taken to the White House, where it lies in state on the first floor. On the floors above, members of the Kennedy family are gathered with Prince Radziwill, McNamara, and Aristotle Onassis. On the morning of November 24, 2 days after Kennedy's death, Oswald is killed in an underground passage at the Dallas police station by his possible accomplice, Jack Ruby. In these frames, we see Oswald catching sight of Ruby, then turning in an attempt to dodge the pistol shots. A captain of the Dallas police ought to have been covering Oswald from the front, but moves to the right and does not turn to look after the shooting. This same Dallas policeman radioed the squad cars a description of Oswald as Kennedy's presumed killer only a few minutes after the shooting. How did he know? Now here is the scene again in slow motion.
Oswald was escorted out, were the policemen to either side of him? Weren't there any in front of him?
Yes.
How did the man get by the policeman in front?
The only thing I know is what someone said he jumped. Now, I didn't look around until I heard the shot and I saw the smoke. Then the struggle was on.
The bartender of the carousel, who might have seen Oswald and Ruby together, mysteriously disappears. 3 striptease dancers from the club are killed within a few months.
He got into the Dallas police station.
That's what they said. Jumped over a fence, walked in, and said, "Hello, here I am. Come on up and see the show and what's happening, boys," and just ingratiating himself.
Was this the normal Jack Ruby reacting at this point?
Oh, yes.
This is Jack Ruby walking toward his cell in Dallas. In Washington, John Kennedy's state funeral is being held. The funeral is attended by heads of state from all over the world. There is an atmosphere of sadness and fear. Robert Kennedy, although he is the Attorney General, will not officially take part in the investigations on his brother's death, and he will later accept the conclusion of the Warren report. After the president's assassination, Ted Kennedy's plane is involved in a mysterious crash. Ted is one of the 3 survivors pulled out from the wreckage. All the others aboard are dead.
Mr. Hopper, now that Kennedy is dead, will there be any change with President Johnson?
Only if Bobby Kennedy leaves as Attorney General and somebody takes his place who understands the oath of office that he takes and recognizes we don't need a police state in the United States.
The commission headed by Supreme Judge Earl Warren and including Allen Dulles, former chief of the CIA, starts its work. Ruby's attorney, Tuna Hill, says,
In my opinion, he wouldn't have had that. He would have been forced to instruct the jury to return a verdict of not guilty on the ground of insufficient evidence because under Texas law, Article 714 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, a wife cannot give evidence against her husband, nor can she give leads that leads to the development of evidence against her husband. And the primary evidence that was so damaging against Oswald, connecting him with a rifle, all came from Marina Oswald.
Clay Shaw, a businessman said by some papers to be connected with the U.S. Counter-Espionage Service, is charged by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison with having organized the assassination of President Kennedy. Witnesses and reporters who have taken an interest in the case die in peculiar circumstances. A civil airline pilot, Dave Ferry, who had transported arms to Cuba, is called in by Garrison to testify. Miss Perry Russo claims that he, Oswald, and Clay Shaw attended the meeting at which Ferry said he would be capable of killing the president.
But, of course, remembering that he had made remarks about the ease of to be able to kill a president in October and late September of 1963, he remarked at some length, as we were discussing politics in general, that he said, we will kill him, we will get him. And he talked on how easy and really simple it would be to do it, because if you had the easy, convenient way to get out of the country, and he felt that he had that convenient way to get out of the country in the sense of being an airline pilot.
Ferry, said to have been a pilot for Carlos Marcello, dies before Garrison can question him. His death is the result of a brain hemorrhage, such as may be caused by a blow on the back of the neck. James Llewellyn, Ruby's cellmate, is questioned by Garrison, and his attorney, George Piazza, dies shortly afterwards in a plane crash. Ruby says he is scared to talk in Dallas. If they would question him in Washington, he could tell them everything. But they keep him there. A Dallas cab driver, Raymond Cummings, claims to have driven Oswald and Ferry to Ruby's club a few weeks before the president's assassination. According to Garrison, Oswald had been sent to Russia by the CIA as a radar expert for the U-2 spy flights.
CIA dossier on Lee Harvey Oswald, such as the CIA file on Lee Oswald's accessibility to information about the U-2, such as the CIA file on Jack Ruby. At the same time, this government pretends that Oswald had no connection with the U.S. government, and that he was just a lonesome individual who read Marx, the thundering words of Marx in the library, and was seized with an urge to go assassinate a president. At the same time, they say this. They also say, you cannot see our files about Oswald and about the CIA and about Oswald and the U-2 and about the CIA and Jack Ruby because it would affect national security. Why? Because these individuals are connected with national security.
When the Warren report is presented to the public on the eve of the elections, Oswald is named as the only one responsible and stated to be quite unconnected with any plot.
The best example of that is the callous, knowing concealment of the truth about the assassination of John Kennedy by high agencies of the federal government, including the President of the United States, who knows very well that Lee Oswald did not pull a trigger, and who had to know before the sun set on November 22nd, 1963, that Lee Oswald did not pull a trigger.
Jim Garrison also accuses Robert Kennedy of washing his hands of the investigations into his brother's death for political reasons. In Washington, the wives of the truck drivers demonstrate against Robert Kennedy. He also has to defend himself before a Senate commission for having published articles defamatory to Hoffa and his union.
I might say that in connection with the investigation of the Teamsters Union, Mr. Hoffa particularly, a great deal of evidence was developed indicating violent beatings and terrorism in connection with those who had opposed the international president of the Teamsters Union. There was testimony developed eventually in connection with threats against me and against my family.
At another trial in Chattanooga, Tennessee, part of Carlos Marcello's territory, Jimmy Hoffa is sentenced for bribing the jury. As usual, Hoffa claims it is another of Robert Kennedy's infernal plots.
Not have any anxiety until this trial is over, because ultimately they will find this is another propaganda scene of Mr. Robert Kennedy.
Carlos Marcello offers $1 million to bribe Edward Parthian, the principal witness against Hoffa. But this bribe fails, and Hoffa, Robert Kennedy's enemy, must stay in jail. At the 1964 elections, Lyndon Johnson runs to be confirmed in office as president. But at the Democratic Convention, although not a candidate, Robert Kennedy is given the longest standing ovation in American electoral history, the applause lasting a good 16 minutes. In the end, Johnson is re-elected president. He promises aid to Vietnam, but it will be military aid. Escalation transforms the guerrilla warfare into a massacre which costs America $100 billion a year. More and more troops are needed for the war. In Vietnam, Robert Kennedy says, millions of innocent people are suffering the consequences of brutal passions and beliefs they can hardly understand. Johnson goes personally to Vietnam to decorate General Westmoreland. Meanwhile, the Kennedy clan celebrates the birth of Bobby's 10th child. Ted also arrives with his last-born child. And there, as usual, are Cardinal Cushing and Old Joe Sr., paralyzed in his wheelchair. Joe has decided to finance another election campaign, the one to make Robert President of the United States.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. I do not run for the presidency merely to oppose any man, but to propose new policies.
Of course, you always, this life that we all live, have to take your chances, and it seems everybody speculates these days.
Policies to end the bloodshed in Vietnam and in our cities. Policies to close the gap that now exists between black and white, between rich and poor, between young and old, in this country and around the rest of the world.
Some people speculate in gold, a primary metal, and some people just go around speculating in primaries. The press asked for my reaction to the recent activities of the senator from New York. And I don't want to tell you all of my reactions this morning. But when I read in the paper that he pushed him toward our Meet the Press program Sunday, I thought he was just going too far too early.
The danger of another Kennedy getting into the White House brings into action a whole series of hostile movements and threats. even against the lives of Kennedy and Martin Luther King, who backs him with the black vote. Martin Luther King delivers his last speech in Memphis, Tennessee, once again a city controlled by Carlos Marcello.
I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Martin Luther King has been shot through the forehead on this veranda of a motel for black people in Memphis. The sniper, a white man, shot him from the window of a rooming house opposite. The Attorney General, Ramsey Clark, answers questions of journalists.
Mr. Clark, is there any proof that there was a plot behind this assassination?
We have no evidence that there was a widespread plot. The evidence at this time indicates that it was the act of a single individual.
Oh, Mr. Attorney General, you have some evidence as to the identity of the killer.
As far as identification, no.
Some witnesses saw two men. Later, the FBI identifies the killer as James L. Ray, a professional criminal from New Orleans, Carlos Marcello's headquarters. According to King's friends, James L. Ray, who was reportedly arrested in Dallas the day of Kennedy's death, did not shoot King, but was just a conscripted accomplice. An underground organization helped him to escape to Canada, to Portugal, and to England, spending thousands of dollars. Certain indications point to Cosa Nostra, which is reported as having done a favor for the Ku Klux Klan. Throughout the United States, the fury of the blacks explodes. The capital of the United States seems a city at war. Armed troops are sent to garrison the Capitol and the White House. Unescorted, Robert Kennedy ventures into the districts of Washington where disorders have been most violent. His presence is meant as a reminder that if he becomes president, he will bring peace to the United States as well as in Vietnam. Earlier, he had supported the Vietnam War, but now he considers it an inhuman slaughter. His political ambition and arrogance have slowly been transformed into a sense of mission and integrity. Every day, millions of Americans watch on their television screens such scenes as these. General Westmoreland, U.S. Commander-in-Chief in Vietnam, is recalled to Washington to report on the situation. The general flies by helicopter from the airport to the White House. The streets are filled with crowds demonstrating against him. Johnson's plans for the Great Society have foundered on the reef of Vietnam. Robert Kennedy, this white millionaire who utilizes his resources on behalf of the blacks and against the war, is more familiar with acting decisively than with negotiating deals with senators and congressmen. But it is precisely this spontaneity of his that appeals to so many Americans. The faithless men of the old frontier feel threatened by Kennedy. He is feared by the oilmen dependent on Nigerian oil, while the Biafran population is dying of starvation and bullets. There is oil behind the Greek colonels as well. And there is oil behind the war between the Arabs and the Jews. Robert Kennedy's killer, Sirhan Sirhan, is connected with the racetracks of California, controlled by Mickey Cohen. Cohen is an old enemy, branded by Kennedy as a gangster. Even Sinatra states that Robert is not suitable to be president. Ramparts magazine accuses Carlos Marcello and one of his henchmen, Jack Halpin, of having supplied money and votes to further the political career of Lyndon Johnson and the Supreme Court Justice Tom Clark of Texas, who had sworn in his son Ramsey Clark as the new Attorney General. Rampart says that Robert Kennedy, while still Attorney General, had been taken aback by the names involved in the affair and had hushed up the investigation. Robert spends the last serene hours of his life with his children in Disneyland. Victory in California will open the road for him to the White House. From there, he will be able to reopen investigations of the underworld and the setup behind his brother's death in Dallas. But his enemies are not asleep. Robert Kennedy's execution is near at hand. His speech in Los Angeles will be his last one.
What I think is quite clear is that we can work together in the last analysis, and that what has been going on within the United States over the period of the last 3 years, the divisions, the violence, the disenchantment with our society, the divisions, whether it's between blacks and whites, between the poor and the more affluent, or between age groups, or in the war in Vietnam, that we can start to work together. We are a great country, and a selfish country, and a compassionate country. And I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of
Hidden in the crowd, Sirhan Sirhan bides his time.
So, my thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
Robert Kennedy will never get to Chicago. This is the naked record of his death. Sirhan Sirhan, the man who allegedly fired all 8 pistol shots, is defended against the crowd's attempts to lynch him. Robert Kennedy is already dead, even though his heart goes on beating for a few more hours. The Los Angeles police take good care of Sirhan Sirhan, another assassin said to be without accomplices.
According to the information that I have at this moment, we have no evidence of conspiracy, only the evidence of this individual action.
Inside St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, the political career of Robert Kennedy comes to an end. Even the last rites are governed by schedules and protocol. Humphrey, Nixon. The last to enter is President Johnson. With Supreme Court Justice Warren, Johnson stands on the left. The members of the family stand on the other side, to the right of the casket. The struggle for power stops for a few moments. Robert Kennedy is dead. Others will go on.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. Be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. Like it or not, we live in times of danger and uncertainty, but they are also more open to the creative energy of men than any other time in history. Our future may lie beyond our vision, but it is not completely beyond our control. And I believe that in this generation, those with the courage to enter the moral conflict will find themselves with companions in every corner of the globe.
Robert Kennedy's last goodbye from those who mourn him. The assassinations of the Kennedys are not just the tragic story of one family. Neither is this specifically an American story. It is a story of the violent struggle of power and wealth. The struggle has been fought before, and it has not ended. Americans study such battles for power as children in world history classes. Yet, as a nation of high ideals, they cannot believe that the same kind of clandestine ambitions for wealth and power can influence or control their own politics and society. It can't happen here, they say, but it can happen anywhere, if the people allow it. No nation can be truly free when it can be manipulated in secret. A free society must hold its institutions and individuals accountable. In these political executions, the evidence is an overwhelming challenge to the concept that the Kennedys died at the hands of isolated, demented individuals. The interconnection of historical facts defy the concept of mere coincidence. As the Americans celebrate the 200th anniversary of their nation, the greatest challenge before them is to re-examine these mysteries, or they will continue.
This is the stage on which we will dramatize 13 days in which the world came to the brink of nuclear war.
Mr. President, we've received hard evidence that the Russians have placed offensive weapons in Cuba.
What kind of weapons?
Nuclear missiles.
Over. The U.S. Tactical Air Force Command from Commanding Officer 47th Attack Squadron. All aircraft fully ready, fully armed, and on air alert.
I'm not interested in the destruction of the world, but if we all want to meet in hell, it's up to you.
You've done everything possible to anticipate this, Mr. President.
Have I? Combat air patrols on station. All units full readiness status.
Do you want to further test Kennedy's nerve? Are you prepared for war? Are you prepared for total destruction? Give me an answer.